Hello. Today, we're diving deep into a single plot of land that is about to change the entire political map. What if the single most popular, internationally backed solution to one of the world's most intractable conflicts just vanished? Not with a treaty, not with a war, but with concrete. And a whole lot of it. That's the reality unfolding in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, where a recently approved, decades-old plan is set to achieve what years of negotiations, wars, and diplomacy couldn't: the death of the two-state solution. We're talking about the E1 settlement, an area of about 12 square kilometers that's small on a map, but enormous in its geopolitical consequences. The story begins in August of 2025. The Israeli government gives the final green light to the E1 settlement plan. This isn't just another neighborhood. It's the largest new settlement approval in decades, since the 1990 seconds. The immediate plan: 3,400 new housing units. The future potential: up to 15,000 units. This construction requires the forceful displacement of the roughly 2,500 Bedouin Arabs who currently inhabit the area. But forget the size for a moment. It's all about location, location, location. E1 is situated directly adjacent to and northeast of East Jerusalem, which Israel unilaterally annexed in 1980, and where hundreds of thousands of Israeli Jewish settlers already live, and just west of Maale, Adumim, one of the larger Israeli settlements in the West Bank, home to around 40,000 Israeli Jewish settlers. The simple act of building E1 will directly link the two together and create a continuous Jewish urban corridor, a settlement megalopolis stretching across the pre-1967 Green Line border. This continuous Israeli corridor achieves a second, far more catastrophic objective. It cleaves the West Bank in half. Picture the largest continuous Palestinian urban area, the backbone of any future state, running from Ramallah in the north down to Bethlehem in the south. The E1 wedge cuts right through it. It isolates East Jerusalem, the city the Palestinians envision as their future capital, by effectively encircling it with a continuous ring of Israeli settlements. It leaves the future Palestinian state, if it ever exists, with a single, narrow, and vulnerable passage, fewer than 20 kilometers wide, through the Jordan Valley around Jericho, for any remaining territorial contiguity. In essence, it's a way for Israel to effectively kill the idea of a functioning independent Palestinian state from ever arising in the West Bank without actually declaring it, and without receiving as much widespread international condemnation like a full-on annexation of the West Bank would incur instead. So why now? E1 plans were first proposed decades ago, back in the 1990 seconds, but were frozen over sharp international condemnation, even from Israel's greatest international supporter, the United States. The answer lies in global politics. The catastrophic levels of destruction dealt by Israel's war in Gaza since it began, coupled with an ongoing credible genocide investigation, and the UN's declaration in August 2025 that a widespread famine had set in, sparked an international movement. The international recognition of Palestine as a state expanded more than it had in decades beforehand. Across 2024, Barbados, Jamaica, Ireland, Norway, Spain, Slovenia, and Armenia all extended their recognitions, while Mexico took the same step in early 2025. By mid-2025, a coalition of Western states, including the UK, Canada, Australia, and France, announced their intention to recognize the Palestinian state. Almost immediately, the E1 plan was dusted off and approved. It was a clear geopolitical act of retaliation, a message from Jerusalem. You can recognize Palestine on paper all you want, but words and recognitions would do nothing to stop them from killing the idea on the ground. High-ranking Israeli political figures have been clear about the E1 settlement's purpose for months now. At the announcement of the E1 plan's approval in August, the Israeli finance minister and settler himself, Bezalel Smotrich, proudly proclaimed, "The Palestinian state is being erased from the table, not with slogans, but with actions. Every settlement, every neighborhood, every housing unit is another nail in the coffin of this dangerous idea." In September, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared that there will never be a Palestinian state, and that the land where E1 will be built on belongs only to Israel. The final approval for the E1 settlement today in 2025 is merely the culmination of a decades-long, slow, methodical strategy to kill the two-state solution. The kidney-shaped West Bank, about the size of the U.S. state of Delaware, has long been viewed as the core territory of the future Palestinian state. Its existence began with the chaos that went down here in 1948, following the rejected 1947 UN partition plan. Israel emerged victorious from the 1948 war, expanding their de facto borders beyond the UN proposal to what became the pre-1967 Green Line borders, recognized by most countries. Egypt occupied the Gaza Strip, and Jordan occupied the West Bank and East Jerusalem. This extinguished the prospect of a separate, independent state for the Palestinian people. Then came the 1967 war. Israel overrun and occupied the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, the Gaza Strip from Egypt, and the Golan Heights from Syria. These territories beyond the Green Line have been known as the Israeli-occupied territories ever since. In 1988, Jordan formally renounced its territorial claims, legally leaving the West Bank and East Jerusalem as exclusively Palestinian territories occupied by Israel. Despite decades of international calls for a two-state solution based on these pre-1967 boundaries, the Israeli government has steadily worked toward making it impossible to ever actually implement. One major step was taken in 1980, when the Israeli government unilaterally declared to annex East Jerusalem, proclaiming that all of Jerusalem would remain their own undivided, exclusive capital. The vast majority of countries around the world still have never recognized this, and continue to regard East Jerusalem as Israeli-occupied territory. But beyond the legal grip, Israel pursued a demographic grip. By 1980, around 40,000 Jewish Israeli settlers had moved into East Jerusalem, living alongside roughly 120,000 Palestinians. Palestinians made up roughly 75% of East Jerusalem's population then. Official Israeli policy explicitly aimed to maintain a demographic balance, pushing for a ratio closer to 70% Jewish to 30% Palestinian across the unified city. Over subsequent decades, settlement expansion in East Jerusalem increased dramatically. As of 2024, the Palestinian population in East Jerusalem is about 350,000. The percentage of Palestinians living within East Jerusalem has therefore declined substantially from 75% in 1980 down to just 60% of the East Jerusalem population today. Across the whole unified city of Jerusalem today, 57% of the population is now Jewish, and just 39% is Palestinian, strengthening Israel's demographic hold over the whole city. Beyond East Jerusalem, the Israeli state has been encouraging a vast settlement program across the greater West Bank. Successive Israeli governments have used economic subsidies, strategic military concerns, and ideological propaganda to encourage Jewish settlement. The occupied West Bank is often referred to in legal documents as Judea and Samaria, names taken from ancient kingdoms nearly 3,000 years ago. The settlers themselves are not a monolith. Some are ideological, religious Zionists, while others are simply economic opportunists seeking cheap housing, as the cost of living is significantly lower in the settlements than it is within pre-1967 Israel. The Israeli military generally sees the settlements as strategically useful, increasing their demographic hold over the high ground, which acts as a buffer, separating Israel's core cities on the Mediterranean coast from their potentially hostile Arab neighbors. In 1967, the Jewish population in the territory was effectively zero. Today, nearly 6 decades later, more than 500, 000, Israeli Jewish settlers live across the occupied West Bank in 140 Israeli government-recognized settlements and around 200 smaller settler outposts, alongside roughly 3 million Palestinians. This transformed the Jewish population in the West Bank from 0% to more than 14% in just 58 years. The sheer difficulty of removing this population is the entire point. While Israel dismantled all its settlements and forcibly withdrew 8,000 settlers from Gaza in 2005, doing the same in the West Bank would involve more than 500,000 settlers in order of magnitude difference. Relocating all 500,000 plus settlers would be an enormous logistical, financial, ideological, and humanitarian challenge, with the legitimate risk of triggering a civil war in Israel from armed resistance by the more ideological settlers. The Israeli state has known for decades that the higher the population of Jewish settlers became, the more inconceivable relinquishing control over the West Bank would become. The closest the Israelis and Palestinians ever came to agreeing on a lasting peace arrangement was in 1993 with the Oslo Accords. The Accords divided the West Bank's territory into 3 temporary zones of control, which, due to the breakdown of peace negotiations, have remained constant for more than 30 years. Area C, under full Israeli military control, making up roughly 60% of the West Bank's territory. This area includes most of the settlements, strategic high ground, and valuable agricultural lands. Virtually all Palestinian building requests here are consistently denied. Areas A and B, the supposedly Palestinian-controlled enclaves, which are not contiguous and are separated by the Sea of Israeli control in Area C, leading to them sometimes being referred to as the Palestinian Archipelago or the Palestinian Islands. This separation extends to the legal system. Palestinians in Area C and those arrested elsewhere are governed by Israeli military law. Jewish Israeli settlers in the territory are governed completely separately by the Israeli Civil Code. This results in 2 different populations of people living within the exact same territory, but only one of which actually enjoys usual civilian human rights protections. A system multiple human rights organizations accuse of being effectively a modern system of apartheid. Beyond the Oslo Accords, the Israelis took many other steps to solidify their hold. Starting in 2002, the Israeli government began the construction of a vast and complicated system of walls and fences across the West Bank, often referred to as the separation barrier. While the stated goal was security against Palestinian attacks, an astonishing 85% of the route that has been built actually cuts across the territory of the West Bank instead, plunging deep into the territory to incorporate multiple Israeli Jewish settlements within the Israeli side of the wall. As of the end of 2022, roughly 65% of the originally intended barrier route has been completed. The International Court of Justice, in an advisory opinion in 2004, noted the concern that the route of the wall would prejudge the future frontier between Israel and Palestine. If the West Bank is ever to become fully Palestinian, what will happen to all of these walled-off settlements that are so directly integrated with the Israeli urban areas? The Israelis also control most of the access to resources in the West Bank, especially the territory's water supply. The mountain aquifer is the largest natural source, but the Israeli government has imposed strict regulations on its use, and access to the Jordan River's waters is prohibited to the Palestinians. The difference in water consumption between Israeli Jewish settlers and Palestinians in the West Bank is astonishing. Israeli Jewish settlers consume an average of 320 liters of water per day. Palestinians consume an average of just 88 liters of water per day, less than a third of what the settlers consume on the same land, and below the 100 liters per day minimum recommended by the World Health Organization. And then, nearly all of Israel's policies of creeping annexation that they pursued for decades began rapidly accelerating after Hamas's October 7th attack. As the Israeli military focused on Gaza, the world's attention was less focused on the West Bank, which gave Israel an opportunity to further advance their hold in the name of security and defense. In 2023, largely after the October 7th attack, Israel demolished significantly more Palestinian homes in both the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem than it did across the previous year in 2022. And it demolished even more in 2024. Simultaneously, the Israeli government effectively ceased demolishing illegal structures and outposts built by settlers since 2023. In 2022, there were around 300 reported instances of law enforcement against settlers. Across the first half of 2023, there were only 10, and enforcement was halted entirely by the summer of that year. Simultaneously, construction of obstacles and barriers to movement for the Palestinians dramatically increased. Before the start of the war in Gaza in 2023, the UN's humanitarian agency, OCHA, reported 565 separate obstacles to movement. By early 2025, that number had surged to 850 separate obstacles. This forces Palestinians into taking major diversions and spending hours at military checkpoints for travel that should take minutes. And this leads us back up to the Israeli government's recent approval of the E1 settlement plan, and how it'll be even more disastrous for the future of an independent Palestinian state arising in the West Bank than anything before it. In March of 2025, a few months before the construction for thousands of homes at E1 were approved, the Israeli government approved and budgeted for the construction of a brand new road from East Jerusalem across the West Bank that would be reserved exclusively for Palestinians. While presented as a way to relieve traffic congestion, this move is actually finalizing Israel's plans to fully segregate the road networks in the West Bank between Palestinians and settlers. Henceforth, there will be only one major road reserved for Palestinians and one other reserved for Israelis. This rerouting enables all of the Israeli reserved roads to seamlessly connect the Israeli settlements together with Israeli cities on the other side of the Green Line in East Jerusalem. In effect, the new E1 settlement and the pre-existing nearby Israeli settlements will cleave the West Bank into two separate halves. The nearly continuous, dense Palestinian urban area from Ramallah in the north down to Bethlehem in the south, the very core of the entire West Bank's Palestinian population, will become effectively split in half by continuous and firm exclusive Israeli control. East Jerusalem will become further isolated from both sides of this Palestinian urban area, and Israel will solidify its control over the high ground around the city. For any hope of the two-state solution to be even remotely workable in the future, the Israelis would have to withdraw from E1 and dismantle their presence in the area to ensure an actually contiguous and functioning independent Palestinian state in the West Bank. But assuming they don't do that, so long as E1 remains in place, there's probably no real hope for the two-state solution ever actually happening. The history of this region is long, painful, and complex. But the approval of E1 in 2025 marks a definitive pivot point, transitioning from the hope, however slim, of separation to the reality of permanent integration and segregated control. As the physical reality on the ground shifts, so too must the world's approach to finding peace. But that's all for today. Thank you for watching. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Tell us in the comments what surprised you the most in this video, or what you found the most fascinating. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Many more thrilling, shocking, and mind-blowing stories are coming soon.